Welcome to tonight's Read Aloud, boys and girls. We are going to read The Widow's Broom. This happens to be one of my favorites. The Widow's Broom by Chris Van Allsburg. Witches' brooms don't last forever. They grow old, and even the best of them one day lose the power of flight. Fortunately, this does not happen in an instant. A witch can feel the strength slowly leaving her broom. The sudden bursts of energy that once carried her quickly into the sky become weak. Longer and longer running starts are needed for takeoff. Speedy brooms that are in their youth outraced hawks are passed now by slow-flying geese. When these things happen, a witch knows it's time to put her old broom aside and have a new one made. On very rare occasions, however, a broom can lose its power without warning and fall with its passenger to the earth below, which is just what happened one cold autumn night many, many years ago. Out of a moonlit sky, a dark-cloaked figure came spinning to the ground. The witch, along with her tired broom, landed beside a small white farmhouse, the home of a lonely widow named Mina Shaw. At daybreak, Widow Shaw discovered a witch lying in her vegetable garden. She was bruised and bloody and couldn't stand up on her own. In spite of her fear, and because she was a kind woman, Mina Shaw helped the witch inside and put her to bed. The witch asked Mina Shaw to draw the curtains, wrapped herself tightly in her black cape, and fell soundly asleep. She lay there perfectly still all day, all evening. When she finally awoke at midnight, her wounds had completely healed. She rose from the bed and moved silently through the widow's house. Mina Shaw was asleep in a chair by the fireplace, where embers of a dying fire glowed on the hearth. The witch knelt and took one of those red-hot coals in her hand. Outside, she made a fire of leaves and twigs and then dropped a strand of her hair into the flames. The fire hissed and crackled, burning with a brilliant blue light. Before long, the witch could see a dark form flying overhead. It was another witch who circled slowly and landed beside the fire. The two women spoke briefly, the first witch gesturing towards the garden where her old broom rested. Then they sat side by side on the second witch's broom and flew off over the treetops. When Mina Shaw woke up, she wasn't surprised to find that her guest was gone. Witches, she knew, had unusual powers. It didn't surprise her either when she saw the old broom had been left behind. The widow guessed it had lost its magic. It was an ordinary broom now, just like the one she kept in her kitchen. She began using it around the house and found that it was no better or worse than the brooms she had used before. One morning, Mina Shaw, still in bed, when she heard a noise coming from the kitchen. She peeked in and saw something that made her heart jump. There, in the middle of her kitchen, was the broom, and it was sweeping the floor all by itself. It stopped for a moment, turned to the widow, then went straight back to work. Not a week passed before the widow's neighbors, the Spivies, found out about the broom. Their farm was just down the road and the only other place around. It was one of 8 Spivey children who saw the broom first. When the boy told his father, Mr. Spivey ran straight across the road to the widow's house. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Did she really have such a broom?" "Oh, yes," Mina Shaw answered. "It's wonderful." She told her neighbor all about the broom and the witch who had left it behind. Then she took him around back to the house where the broom was hard at work splitting wood. Mr. Spivey was horrified. "This is a wicked, wicked thing, Mina Shaw." "It's the devil." The broom stopped working and, still clutching the axe, hopped towards the widow and her neighbor. Mr. Spivey, red-faced with anger, turned quickly and hurried home. Soon, more distant neighbors heard about the broom and visited the widow's farm. The men who saw it seemed to agree it probably was a wicked thing, but their wives pointed out that it was a great help to the widow and could play the piano well, considering that it struck just one note at a time. No one's feelings were as strong as Mr. Spivey's. "It's evil and it's dangerous, I say," he told everyone who would listen. "We'll be sorry if that thing stays among us." As days went by, the broom seemed as innocent and as hardworking as ever. Though it had learned how to do many things, sweeping brought it such pleasure. It was, after all, a broom. Occasionally, when there was nothing left to do around the widow's house, it would hop down to the road that separated Mina Shaw's and the Spivey's farm. The road was dirt, of course, and the broom could amuse itself for hours by just sweeping and sweeping and sweeping. One afternoon, 2 of the Spivey boys and their dog walked along the road where the broom was happily at work. Along the road where the broom was happily, not bothering anybody, doing its favorite thing, sweeping. The boys saw what it was doing, and they kicked a small stone at the broom, which it had already swept aside. The broom ignored them and shuffled off to sweep another part of the road. But the Spivey boys would not leave it alone. They called the broom names. When it continued to ignore them, they picked up a couple of sticks and started tapping the broom's handle. Finally, it stopped sweeping. The broom turned to the 2 boys and knocked them both on the head so hard they fell to the ground in tears. The broom hopped off, but the Spivey's dog ran after it, yapping and biting at its bristles. "Get him!" the boys yelled. The little dog leaped into the air and caught the broom by the handle. But he wasn't there for long. That evening, Mr. Spivey drove his wagon up to the widow's house. He was not alone. 3 men from the neighboring farms were in the wagon, along with a long wooden snake and coils of rope. Mr. Spivey knocked loudly. When she opened the door, Mina Shaw was frightened by what she saw. "We've come for the broom," the neighbors told her. "It's beaten my sons and likely to done worse to my dog. The poor animal was nowhere to be found." The widow could tell by the faces that the men would not be leaving without the broom. There was nothing she could do to stop them. For a moment she stood silently and then answered, "Of course you are right. If it could do such a thing, we must get rid of it." She led the men into the kitchen. "It sleeps in there," she whispered, pointing to the closet. "If you move it carefully, it won't wake up." The men knew how strong the broom was and hoped the widow was right. Oh, the poor Broom. They opened the closet door, revealing the slumbering Broom. Ooh, that's a good word, slumbering. One of the farmers took it out and gently held it against the stake, while the others wrapped it in yards of rope. They carried the Broom outside, drove the stake into the ground, gathered straw around it. Mr. Spivvy lit the fire. In no time, flames turned the Broom to ashes. Life soon returned to normal around the widow's farm. The Spivvies even found their dog, healthy but hungry, caught in the branches of a tall spruce tree. Then one morning, Nina Shaw called on her neighbors with frightening news. She had seen the ghost of the Broom. It was as white as snow and moved through the woods at night carrying an axe. Mr. Spivvy did not believe her, of course, but that night, under a full moon, he watched from a window as the Broom's white ghost came out of the woods and slowly circled his house. The next night it returned, circling even closer. And the night after it, it came again, tapping the axe lightly on the Spivvy's door. The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Spivvy packed their dearest possessions and 8 children into the wagon. Mr. Spivvy tried to convince the widow to leave with them, but she chose to stay behind in her little farmhouse. She went down to the road as the wagon pulled away and waved goodbye to her neighbors. "You're a brave woman," Mr. Spivvy called out. That evening, the widow fell asleep in her chair by the fire. She'd been listening to music, simple tunes, played one note at a time on a piano. A gentle tap on the shoulder woke her. She looked up and smiled at her dear Broom. Not a ghost at all, but still covered with a coat of white paint she'd given it. "You play so nicely," Minna Shaw said. The Broom bowed, put a log on the fire, and played another tune. I hope you enjoyed our book tonight, The Widow's Broom. It's one of my very favorites. What thing around your home, if it would had powers, could really help you do your chores? Like always, I love and miss you much, and we'll see you soon.